If you're watching this right now and maybe you're 30, 40, 50 pounds overweight, you may be counting the wrong thing. Instead of counting your calories, you should be counting your habits.
The biggest thing that I have against calorie counting too, or even prescribing macros to people, is that I become the expert of their own body and what they need. They're going to rely on me always to give them those numbers. If I actually teach them the skills to rely on their own body, they can start to use that for critical thought outside of when we're meeting.
One of the biggest misconceptions a lot of times is we think our body is just a vehicle, but it's a very, very complex vehicle.
Yeah.
It's a vehicle that has a ton of chemical reactions happening.
Yep.
And it's not just calories. If you just think calories is just gas, then sure, it'd be very simple. But the truth is our body's relying on so many compounds for our brains to work, for our bodies to heal, to getting us be motivated to do something. Like there's all kinds of chemical things that are happening.
And one of the most successful ways that people can be decreasing their calories and get into a deficit is by only eating to 80% full.
If I can't count calories and I'm supposed to count something, what are like 1 or 2 metrics that you would recommend counting first if they initially want to lose weight? Action.
Did you know that food labels can have errors of up to 20%? And that most people, when they're tracking their calories, they're underestimating their calories by about 20 to 30%. So today in our Dietitian and Trainer series, we are going to be talking all things calories and answering the number one question we get, which is, should I count calories to lose weight?
Hi guys, if you're new here, my name is Coach Royce. This is my wife, Tara. I have been a trainer for 15 plus years. My wife has been a dietitian for 8 years. So we are going to be sharing some insights on this particular questions, primarily from the experiences that we've had as a practitioner, but also a little bit from our own experiences as well. And hopefully if you guys gain value, make sure to share, make sure to subscribe, make sure to comment below if you have other questions that we can actually answer. So should I be counting my calories from a dietitian perspective?
Okay, so I'll go first. My initial response is no, and this is why. I actually see so many people on a daily basis. I do virtual assessments when I first meet someone and get to learn a little bit about them. And a lot of people have a history of counting calories and they burned out on it. Mm-hmm. And so when I meet someone and they say, when they're asking me, they usually don't say, should I? It's, do I have to? Mm-hmm. And I can tell in the tone that this is something that they've already done in the past and they've not found it sustainable. Mm-hmm. If you hear a little voice, this is our son, Lucas, who's with us today, who is going to try his hardest to be quiet, but you might hear some little laughs from him. So when I see people and I can tell, okay, they're here to lose weight. We're here to work on potentially lowering blood sugars if they're pre-diabetic or diabetic and working on heart disease. Ultimately, they want to find something that's sustainable. And so for me, I find that actually giving them tools that are more critical thinking skills is more important than teaching them how to count calories. Mm-hmm. So in my mind, I find if I teach someone how to count calories, great. They get really good at counting calories, really good at looking at foods and food labels. But as I mentioned, there can be a lot of errors in food labels and we can rely too heavily on those numbers. And that really puts people at a disadvantage when they don't have access to a food label, when they go out to eat, when they go to a friend's house, and instead they don't have critical thinking skills around nutrition that they can actually use in those cases, which is why in the past they would tell me that calorie counting eventually didn't work for them. Yeah. And they're pretty sick of it. Do you find that that's also true for people that you've been working with, that maybe they've tried it in the past and it's not something that they've found sustainable?
There are select few that are sustainable and they're very rare, right? We've discussed in, past episodes that there's 3 different types of clienteles that we typically get, right? One of them is path oriented. They want to see a path laid out. Like what's week 1, what's week 2, what's week 3, what's to expect in week 12. Like those guys are very methodical. Yep. And then there's another client that's more empathetic. They just want to feel good.
Mm-hmm.
Like I just want to feel good. I don't want to feel too anxious about these things. They're very into the moment. And those clients typically are not very successful when it comes to uh, like counting calories or just counting
100%.
anything. They hate counting,
Mm-hmm.
right? They just want to feel great. And then there's the third, which I think is a very rare type, but there are clients that have tendencies to really find peace in numbers,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's the certainty part of it. And might just be a biased thing, but typically their professions require analytics. They're CFOs of companies.
Yeah.
They're CPAs. They're really numbers dialed in.
Mm-hmm.
So what their career path and how they look at their numbers in terms of nutrition, it almost needs to align. Otherwise, they kind of just freak out, right?
Yep.
So those are the athletes that have a tendency to be extremely successful in caloric counting. But here's the thing. Caloric counting itself can be very difficult without having a method.
Mm-hmm.
So the ones that have kept it sustainable, they not only had the counting capabilities, but they also had this like scientific method attached to it. What I mean by that is like every 3 weeks, we look at it together and we analyze the numbers and then we look at it holistically. Like, where did these foods come from? Was it all from pizza or was it all from like sweet potatoes and
Mm-hmm.
protein? Like, we look at it more as a whole and we observe and then we create actions based on what those look like, not just one number, right? So that's, if you want that to be sustainable, the calories itself is a really, really poor metric, right? So it's like, what's the proteins, what's the carbs, what's the fats? That needs to be kind of a
Mm-hmm.
big thing.
Yeah.
Now, that's like, if 10 people came to me, I want to say only about one of them are successful in it, right? There's a very, very specific type of person that loves that type of thing. Most, though, I find it very difficult. And I've, in the past, initially, calorie in or out was kind of the big thing. However, I found it frustrating. So I found it
Right.
frustrating for myself because we could be doing everything right on the numbers, and sometimes I'll have him even like send me the photos,
Mm-hmm.
and it never adds up correctly.
Yeah.
There's always some sort of error. So like 50% would have massive results, another 50% didn't,
Mm-hmm.
and what I found in common a lot of times was the ones that were successful, they were partly just enjoying the process, and then the other ones just hated it,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's like there has to be some sort of return in terms of emotional investment. If you
Right.
find yourself anxious trying to count calories, I think there's a better way. And that better way is what you've taught and what you teach with your clients often. So, can you share some of how you've somehow bridged the counting a little bit to kind of what you do?
Yeah. So, my number one thing that I do when I work with people and I find out, okay, we're definitely not going to be counting calories, but I'm still going to have them track. And so, one thing that I have them do for me is take pictures of their foods or also just write what it was. So, first, identifying what their foods are throughout the week is one of the most important things. Now, usually, what we're able to do is identify areas where we could cut back in calories without having to count them.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest thing that I see when I first meet with people is that they're eating out. So, restaurant eating or fast food eating, probably 3 to 4 times a week. And so, that's a really good area to start with. And so, what I'm going to be teaching them is the skills to be able to decrease the amount of times that they need to go out to eat. Because going out to eat for the clients that I'm seeing, it's
Mm-hmm.
solving a problem. They
Yeah.
are busy. They are moms who are in the pickup line. They realize that they haven't eaten in 5+ hours. They are starving. They're going to go through the drive through with their kids on the way home. They had
Mm-hmm.
nothing planned outside of that. So, what we're doing in our sessions is once they have recorded what they've been doing for a week, we meet, we look at those times when they're eating out, and we look at that day holistically.
Right.
I start to ask them, okay, so let's say you went 5 hours without eating, right? And you
Mm-hmm.
actually packed snack for your kids for pickup line. Did you pack anything for yourself? No. Okay, we could solve a problem there by helping them actually feel full and sustained for a few more hours before they get home so they could actually get to those groceries and cook a meal at home. So typically the meals that you're eating out are going to be in excess of 500 to 1,000 plus more additional than if you were to make that same like copycat meal at home. So just identifying those times and cutting back on those in the beginning can be really powerful. Outside of just looking at the, like, what are you eating? Like, is it fast food or is it home cooked meals? I also like to help people figure out their hunger and fullness cues. This is huge because a lot of us are eating when we are not hungry, and we're eating to an over excess. So as soon as I start to have people track their foods, they're also noting, how hungry am I before? How full am I afterwards? And one of the most successful ways that people can be decreasing their calories and get into a deficit is by only eating to 80% full. They don't feel that they are not satisfied because they've gone slow with their meal, they've chewed really thoroughly, they've stopped at a point where they know that they're full, but they're not going above that anymore. So when I ask clients, like, could you see yourself doing this from now on? Most of them are like, this is the most sustainable thing that I've ever tried. Just actually empowering them to feel what their own body is telling them.
Yeah.
The biggest thing that I have against calorie counting too, or even prescribing macros to people necessarily, is that I become the expert of their own body and what they need. They're going to rely on me always to give them those numbers. If I actually teach them the skills to rely on their own body, they can start to use that for critical thought outside of when we're meeting.
Powerful, yeah.
Super powerful.
I like that. Yeah, a lot of times when someone specifically asks me that particular question, I have to divide them into almost two categories. There's going to be one athlete that's 30% body fat, so they're significantly overweight. And then there's going to be some athletes that are much less, 15%. They're trying to get their first six pack. I might answer it two different ways. Are you looking to jumpstart your journey or just excited to take on a new challenge? Over the next 30 days, we are running our first ever cohort designed to get you easy wins in your fitness goals. Over the next 30 days, the team and I are going to be providing nutritional guidance, fitness support, and best of all, you're going to be surrounded with like-minded people that are looking to grow. If you've been looking to jumpstart your fitness, create new habits, start your weight loss goal, or maybe your workout's just been a little bit stale and you want to challenge yourself, this cohort is going to be for you. Now, if you're ready to take on this challenge, go to our show notes below, sign up to our free Move 30 challenge, and I'll see you guys there. Now, back to the show. Peace. If you're watching this right now and maybe you're 30, 40, 50 pounds overweight, you may be counting the wrong thing. And what I mean by that, instead of counting your calories, you should be counting your habits. Meaning, like, how many steps am I taking in, right? How much sleep am I getting? How much water am I drinking? Some of these basic habits really attribute to some of the bigger things that's burning your calories overall. And we've talked about the 4 different types of ways to burn calories, like your metabolism is going to be a big component to this first. Your NEAT activity, which is your non-exercise activity,
Right.
and then also the TEF, and then also your EAT. However, I really just want to address the 2 big ones that really take a majority of your caloric burn, which is just NEAT and your metabolism.
Right.
So initially, I really hyper focus on that. I don't even count any calories. I'm really like, how can I influence this person to walk a little bit more? How can I influence this person to reduce their stress so much that they can actually sleep? Right? So I also do encourage them to exercise, but that's a small percentage of their caloric burn, right? That's more of a long-term thing. They'll burn 5 to 10% of what they theoretically will burn throughout the day, But at the end of the day, it's like, what are the big moving pieces that's going to allow them to lose weight?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I primarily focus on. So, and then the other athletes that are 15%, here's what's really interesting. 15% to 10%. You would think I'd be counting their calories to lose weight. I'm actually trying to count up. And oftentimes from 15 to 10%, it's an increase in caloric intake for them to lose weight. It's called like reverse dieting. It's super popular with the bodybuilders, but for the most part, when you get to that state, one, your body is fairly optimal. Your metabolism's pretty high. You probably have your sleep together. You're probably active as a human being, as a parent, because you're fitter, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you have some form of sustainable exercise that you regularly do. So inside the facility, you're just doing more. So what I find, counting calories has been more advantageous a lot of times to increase their food.
Right.
Like, you find me all the time. You're like, how are you? You need to eat more, and it's really interesting how we think we should be counting calories initially,
Mm-hmm.
but I think you should be counting calories when you get closer to the end. But it's not like counting calories to reduce things. It's counting calories to add things.
Yeah.
And which is a mind explosion for me over the course of 15 years, because I used to just reduce, and I found it to be in contrast as I started to train more athletes.
Yeah. And I think we have a similar approach to nutrition, which is more an additive approach.
Yeah.
So we're looking at things that we can actually add and not subtract. So with calories, if you are doing, like, let's say MyFitnessPal or Lose It app, those are the two most popular apps that people use to track their calories. You know that you're being successful if you've hit that calorie mark for the day. Right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the only thing that you know, though, is like your success. And if you see like that your weight is going down. But for our clients, when we're measuring like their success, we know if they're successful because they're having well-timed, balanced
Mm-hmm.
meals. They have enough energy that fueled them to then work out. And
Mm-hmm.
they're seeing that they're able to follow their hunger and fullness cues, and that they are fueling themselves properly. So it's a little bit different of a marker. And I feel like sometimes ours is just that more holistic, additive approach. So I did want to bring up two things that I'll have people look at. So for those of you who are like on your own tracking with a MyFitnessPal or Lose It app and just looking at the calories, one thing that I have my patients do when they're tuning into their hunger and fullness is note, am I getting to overly hungry? So that can be one sign that something is off. When you just look at calories, you could have all of that coming from carbohydrates. That's not going to be sustaining for the day.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to have people tune in a little bit more to their hunger to see what's going on. I actually meet with people and they'll say, oh my gosh, on Tuesday, I was starving at like 7 p.m. And so I totally binged. I had dinner, but then I went overboard and I also had like chips and ice cream afterwards.
Right.
When we look back at their pictures from the day, I'm like, well, I see a lot of vegetables for lunch, which is good, but what was your protein? They totally skipped out on a protein.
Mm-hmm.
Then I say, well, okay, let's look at your breakfast. Okay, you had oatmeal, and I see that you had some fruit in there, which is great, but that's still all carbs. Did you add some protein? So maybe overall, they had 20 grams of protein in that day. So it's very hard for them, even if they had the right number of calories during the day, for their body to not respond and want to binge out. And unfortunately, when we lack protein, we don't crave protein. So I don't know why our bodies work like that, but we're not like at night being like, oh, I need a chicken breast right now.
Yeah.
Like when we're actually below in protein, we crave carbs.
Right.
Which further kind of gets us into this cycle of having way too many carbohydrates and under fueling and not feeling like we can actually participate in exercise because we're having these big sugar spikes and crashes. So the one thing that I would tell people is kind of follow that hunger. If you're really, really hungry, you're probably too low in protein. So there is on a MyFitnessPal or even within like a Lose It app, there is typically like a standard goal set for protein. And I have some people who have never looked at that before. And I would say actually stop focusing on that total calorie number, but let's look at, are you getting enough protein first? And that's when we have programs where we do together nutrition challenges. We actually always do like our first week is like, can you hit the protein goal? Because
Protein's
when
huge,
you've
yeah.
got that in place, you're not going to have that additional hunger coming from that. And that can typically alleviate a lot of this where someone's like, I did so good during the day. And then at night, it's like their body takes over and they can't help but binge.
Yeah. What are your thoughts around someone that's eating 2,000 calories of just like pizza and then another person eating 2,000 calories worth of whole foods? What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, it's going to feel totally different,
Yeah.
which is what I love to explore with people. I try and figure out, how do you feel after your meals? If you're having something like a pizza that's a higher carb meal, maybe there is some protein, but the ratio is just different. So if we think of our standard baseline of what we would say a balanced meal would look like, we love to use the plate method portioning. So that's a quarter of the plate coming from protein, a quarter coming from carbohydrates, half of the plate being filled with vegetables, and 1 to 2 tablespoons of fats. Very balanced. So if you want to have pizza, I'm always trying to tell people too, like, you can still have pizza, have 1 or 2 slices, and then still get your vegetables and make sure that if it's, a thin crust, that's great. If you can eat it slow, if you can also eat that salad first, you're going to feel completely different. And what I find is people who might be just looking at the calories and they're doing things like just having pizza, they're probably having a lot of GI issues.
Yeah.
So they're gassy, they're bloated, they're constipated, or going through bouts between constipation and diarrhea. And so I love to talk about that as a dietitian. I'm always trying to figure out how we can decrease those symptoms. And one of the best ways to do that is to be having those regularly structured, balanced meals throughout the day. So you can still have pizza, but how did the rest of the day look?
Right.
And within that meal, can you add some vegetables in there, please?
Yeah. Yeah. I think this is where the whole concept of not every calorie is equal.
Exactly.
Right. So it's like, yes, you can theoretically eat that and then lose weight. However, it's the effect after. So meaning like, how energized do you really feel after eating a whole box of pizza?
Right.
Right? Do you even feel motivated to go work out after you eat a whole box of pizza? Typically, I mean, at least for me, I'm out, right? I'm sleeping. Right? You have this massive insulin spike, and then all of a sudden you just crash.
Yeah.
And I mean, we can go on top of it, the dopamine side of it. Like you release all kinds of dopamine, which is a motivation for doing more, right? Or a hormone for doing more. And you just completely depleted that.
Yeah.
So how do you feel when you consume that 2,000 calories of X foods is really important and just to be really aware of, because I think it's just huge. People don't really, they're not even conscious of how the food makes them react in general.
And what's interesting for you is probably that being in the gym setting as like a trainer, people are seeing you first to focus on the exercise component, and then they might start thinking about nutrition. So you're probably seeing people in class, and maybe you can, confirm this, but you've had athletes who have like started out in their first few weeks and they're like dying in their workouts, and they're like, oh gosh, I need to get it together because like I was out drinking last night, or like I remember coaching a class and one guy was like almost passing out, and we asked him like what he had eaten, and it was like a 10 o'clock class, and he had like nothing to eat. He was totally dehydrated. But it's interesting because they're trying to do the exercise component first, so you're seeing kind of the consequences of that. And when do you feel like people finally start to be like, oh gosh, I need to do something with the nutrition?
Yeah, I think it's like one of the biggest misconceptions a lot of times is we think our body is just a vehicle, but it's a very, very complex vehicle.
Yeah.
It's a vehicle that is that has a ton of chemical reactions happening
Yep.
And it's not just calories. If you just think calories is just gas, then sure, it'd be very simple. But the truth is, our body's relying on so many compounds for our brains to work, for our bodies to heal, to getting us to just be motivated to do something. Like there's all kinds of chemical things that are happening.
Yep.
And if you're just purely looking at that, what's going to end up happening is your body starts to crash, meaning like we'll have athletes that pass out
Right.
from a warm up,
Mhm.
right? Because all they ate is cereal,
Right.
breakfast, lunch, dinner, right? Or they just don't eat. They just refuse to eat, right? Like and we'll see their performance substantially decrease because their nutrition part of it is extremely poor in terms of quality.
Yeah.
Right. So by introducing more quality foods like not processed foods that are higher in protein,
Mhm.
Carbohydrates that are not extremely refined and processed, like we start to really see them move differently. And if you're moving differently, guess what? You're burning more calories,
Mhm.
one. But number two, you start to create a body that just has more muscle mass.
Mhm.
And then if you have more muscle mass, your metabolism is going up.
Yeah.
So you're not just a simple vehicle. You're extremely complex that requires a ton of chemical compounds for it
Mhm.
to actually work appropriately. And the way you need to do that is to count things beyond calories.
Yeah.
Look at the macros. Look at the micros as well. Like you may be lacking in certain micros as well. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I see.
And I think it's so unique because when I first see people, it's just to talk about nutrition. And they probably haven't considered yet the exercise component. And so once we start to get them feeling energized from their food, they're asking me if I haven't already asked them. Like, I need ideas. Like, I feel abundant in energy and now I'm ready. Like, I really do want to go hiking. I want to go walking more. I want to expend this extra energy, which is one of the coolest things to see. So, a little bit different perspectives in terms of where people are at for when we first see them.
Yeah.
But our answer is very similar. So, no, you do
Yeah.
not have to count calories. Focusing in on things like quality of meals, quality of sleep and stress, as well as some more practical things like we've talked about a lot in this podcast, just practicality of meal prepping or planning being one of the barriers that a lot of people need to focus on first. So if you are going to spend energy, because it does take a lot of energy to count calories, right? It takes time to do that. I'd rather somebody focus that time on meal planning, on looking at their schedule and working with me to find those barriers of why they're getting to this overly hungry or this overly full. Those I find are much better indicators of what's going to happen going forward with their health.
Beautiful. All right, let's end with this question. If I can't count calories and I'm supposed to count something, what are like one or two metrics that you would recommend counting first if they initially want to lose weight?
What sort of metrics to count?
Yeah, anything to count. Just it even can be. Doesn't even have to be metrics.
Mine is always coming back to noting hunger and fullness cues, because every single follow-up session that I have with someone, I ask, did you get to an overly hungry? Did you get to an overly full?
And that's like a 10.
And
that's the mindfulness side.
So that's the mindfulness side. Because if they're doing that, if I say, how many times did you get to an overly hungry in the last week? And when I first see them, that's about a 3 to a 4. When I start to see them getting a lot of progress, we have gotten that down to maybe 0 to 1 times per week. And the same thing for getting to overly full. Both of those things tend to help people decrease calories.
Wow.
Without them having to focus on the calories. Because if you're getting overly hungry, you're probably not getting enough protein, or the logistics of your day doesn't make sense. You need to add in a well-balanced meal so that you can make it to your next meal. And we'll work on meal planning so that way you can have meals that are made in 15 minutes or less, that are 5 ingredients or less, 1 sheet pan meals, crock pot meals, Instapot meals, something that's the practicality of that. And so when they focus on that, and then how many times are you getting to a point where you're overly full? If they, start with me, and usually that's at least 3 to 4 times per week, we want to get that number down to 0. And that's the fun part when I finally ask that person every week, and then they're like, this is weird. I didn't overeat once last week, and I feel great. And how we measure on that scale for the hunger is on 1 to 10 is how I like to do that. 10 is like a hangry. And for fullness, I always measure that on a percentage. So my goal for people is to stop at 80%, but you can get to like 110% if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So like when I'm first meeting with people, they're like, I'm getting like 100% full, like Friday, Saturday, Sunday night. So we're just trying to work on getting that to that 80%. So those are my 2 biggest things to track: hunger and fullness.
Very cool.
What about you?
So I want to do 3.
Okay.
Right? One for a nutritional thing that they can track.
Sure.
The second one is a stress thing they can track. And then the third one is more of a fitness-oriented thing that can track, that can have significant impacts on their health and also their weight loss. So in terms of fitness, tracking your steps.
Love it.
I think it's extremely underrated how that can affect your weight over time.
Yep.
Like we had a discussion 15 years ago when I had clients. A majority of them had like 5,000 steps when they had that little body bug.
Yeah.
And we were able to track it. And what's really interesting is over the course of the year, it's gotten less and less. And if I was to take an athlete right now, it's like 1,000 for some of them. And primarily it's because everything is brought to us. We don't even have to go to work, right?
Yeah.
A majority of it
you
is
don't have to go to the
online.
grocery store.
We don't have to go to the grocery store. Amazon can deliver pretty much everything, right? And it's only going to get less and less as we technologically advance, right? So tracking your steps seems so small, but it can have massive impacts. I'll have athletes that are extremely overweight and they'll lose 20, 30 pounds purely just walking, right? So it's such a powerful metric to track fitness-wise first. Can I get that to about 8 to 10,000? There's the 10,000 rule, but I find if you're getting somewhere around 8, I think you're above 80% of the world. Yeah. So if you can track that on a daily basis, you're going to be doing some pretty cool things metabolically. One, like internally, but also physically, externally, you'll start to lose weight. That's the first metric. How many steps am I getting? If you were going to track something on nutrition and it was just one thing to track, it would be protein for me, right? And I know there's this like 1 gram per pound, and I think that's just way too much. That's just crazy talk. I like 0.8 grams per lean mass. Now, if we want to do the math, let's just say I'm 100 pounds. I'm not 100 pounds, guys. I'm 165. But just for math purposes, let's just say I'm 100 pounds and I'm 10% body fat. So that leaves me with 90 pounds of my weight is muscle and skeletal tissue, but that's like the protein side. Yeah. You want to multiply 0.8 to 90, right? I don't know what the math is, but multiply 0.8 grams to 90 pounds. And that's where like my baseline is for most of my athletes. It starts there and I start to tweak it based on how they're feeling in terms of energy, how they're feeling in terms of, what was the word that you used? Like fullness cues, right? And that's a big thing for me. I was like, is this athlete getting enough protein for what we're doing? Yeah. Right. So that's like, if you want to track something that is on that nutrition label, I think grams of protein is one of the most powerful ones to start tracking first.
I love it. And I'll just jump in and quickly say we also like to just tell people per meal because sometimes that's easier for them to add like 20 to 30 grams per meal. Oh, yeah. 30, 60, 90. For most people with an extra snack, you're up to 100. For most females, anything above 120 or 130 is like so hard to do. Right. So when we work with people individually too, we kind of have like our set points that we're helping them to reach because it's sometimes the practicality. But I love that for that second one because protein is so important. Yeah. Yeah. And just to give you guys an idea, for myself, I take in about 130 grams of protein per day.
everyone thinks that I'm drinking and taking in like 200 grams. I was like,
Right.
if you've seen 200 grams of chicken, guys, it's a lot, right? And I just think it's just too much, and I think it's constantly abused for sure. Like
Yeah.
it's just
Well,
not
it can be hard on your digestive tract when you
huge.
eat too
Yeah.
much because then you're having to take away something else. So you usually don't get enough fiber when you're
Hmm.
getting over 130 grams of protein, is what we've found over the years. And so then you suffer in the bathroom. So
100%.
most people, it's the same thing. So
Yeah.
there's kind of that. But okay, good.
Yeah.
What's your third thing that you would
On the
have people
third,
track?
yeah, on the third thing, this is more on the stress side because
Okay.
stress has a huge effect in our body and our health and our mind, is tracking your sleep.
Yeah.
And just tracking it and just really seeing it for what it is. Am I getting 4 hours? Am I getting 6 hours? Am I getting 8 hours? Am I waking up in the middle of the night? Like, being specific on what you're tracking in terms of sleep is a huge indicator of overall weight loss over time,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's like, it's very hard to function. It's very hard to work out if you're only getting 2 or 3 hours of sleep.
Right.
And I've been in that situation before, primarily because of my stress being so high.
Mm-hmm.
So the sleep is an indicator of how well you're managing your stress. So if you're not sleeping extremely well, I would really look into learning how to manage your stress.
Right.
Right. And we can have a whole podcast on that. I think we've done a podcast on that. If there is, I'll put a link on top of on it. But tracking your sleep is critical, right? And it's just, I mean, your body, that's when your body is repairing, that cognitively your brain is the best, like when it's sleeping pretty well. And everyone has different sleep like needs. But I think just overall, if you can get somewhere around 6 hours of sleep or to 8 hours of sleep, I think it's pretty optimal.
Yeah.
And those are like the big three for me. You master that, typically, I think you'll start to lose pretty significant weight, especially if you're slightly overweight, and you'll get to a spot where you can start tracking other things for sure.
100%.
Cool. Yeah. Did you want to add anything on this?
I think that's it. I think we explained how you can do it without counting calories, which
Yeah.
I love. That's the coolest thing. Once I've been working with someone for a
Mhm.
few months, when they've lost weight and they'll come back to me and they'll be like, I thought you were kind of crazy in the beginning because you told me
Yeah.
I could stop using my fitness pal. And they're
Mhm.
like, but it's worked and I could do this forever.
Do you count calories just for
No.
the audience?
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
No, I get way too obsessive with the numbers, and I don't find it helpful at all.
Yeah.
I focus on quality, focus on my hunger and fullness cues, and then the practicality of just planning as being a busy mom. If
Yeah.
I've got food that's in the refrigerator that I want to get to, like,
Yeah.
that's fine. Like, I will stick to feeling really good and making good decisions. It's when I'm not prepared.
Mhm.
And even then, I feel like we've done a pretty good job over the years, feeling like what
Yeah.
our habits have. We've learned to like go to the grocery store quickly. We did that this weekend. Like, instead of feeling like we're going to go out to eat because we don't have anything, go to the grocery store. Just those
Mhm.
little tips over time. But no, I haven't needed to count calories. I've been doing mindful eating for 10 plus years and it served me well.
Yeah. I also don't count calories.
Yeah.
But
And you've done 1,000 Murphs. So
Yeah.
you're at a level of athleticism that a lot of people think you would have to, or you would
Be
have to
counting.
have a team, or that I'm in the background
Yeah.
counting everything for you and making your meals, which I'm definitely not.
Mhm.
So there is a way to do it. And we always focus on the
Yeah.
practical side. Like, is this sustainable?
Mhm.
And I just don't think it's sustainable to
Yeah.
count calories.
I lied. I sometimes count my calories. And the only time I count my calories is when I'm injured.
Yeah.
And then you're like, are you eating enough? And then when I start manifesting massive amounts of injuries, I'm usually I'm under eating,
Right.
which is fascinating. So I do count, guys, but not count to lose weight. I count to get less injured.
Right.
And
To make sure you have enough.
yeah. And normally my wife is the one that calls me out. It's like, dude, you're not eating anything. And I'm like, yeah, I am.
Yeah.
It's like, what did you do yesterday? And I was like, I did these. And again, that's the only time. And you don't have to be counting calories, guys, to to get the body that you want. And I'd argue there's a lot easier ways. If you guys like this particular episode, my wife talked about how we actually lose weight in 12 weeks without counting a single calorie. We shot a 12-week version of this. If you guys want to watch that episode, the link is up here. And I'll see you guys in the next episode. Peace.